Hello YouTube, this is Ben Gessel. It's kind of late night on Wednesday evening, July 4th, Independence Day. It's kind of dark. Yeah, so you probably can't see very much, just you can just hear my voice. Sorry, I just didn't get out to do a video earlier, but anyway, less a visual video, more of an audio one. So I got a lot of things in my mind. I'll try to not talk about too many things at once tonight, but you guys can contemplate some various things. I think I might do an astronomy video one of these days, or at least not just the scientific side of it, but maybe some other thoughts too. So I haven't seen too many videos about the subject, but Scientology is something that's in the back of my mind as being a very, very crazy, wacky religion. Very crazy, very wacky to the extreme. There are a lot of reasons why it is, and of course, like many other things, it's not necessarily that the members of the people that are Scientologists. The weird thing is that you can be a member of a church and you can also be a Scientologist at the same time, without necessarily being something just philosophical or something. It's something a little different. Scientology is a different thing altogether. It's not really a traditional religion. It's not really a traditional philosophy. It's something that is just different, and some kind of different organization. And without going too much into detail about what it is, I want to mention why I'm starting out with Scientology tonight. It has a lot to do with the sorts of things in life where you know, so many things like this. When you think you're going to get something, or you think this one thing is really great, and it turns out to not really necessarily be all that amazing. And a lot of people are realizing that this is the case with Scientology. And how can I put this? Because everyone has different religious beliefs, and I don't want to talk about religion too much in this video. I might walk around just a little bit here. It's just that I sometimes think a little bit better when I'm walking. It's just that you see, with most religions, that you have a fair number of people that belong to, at least. You have. I'm gonna check something really quick here. Sorry, guys. Well, you have reasons why so many people belong to that church in the first place. So there's something about those religions that has something to do with that religion being a sensible religion to belong to. When I say sensible, what I mean is that there are, for what you put into the religion, you do benefit spiritually, and you benefit in other ways as well. And ultimately you get out of this religion that you might belong to, you get a lot more out of it than you sacrifice. But there are a lot of different ideas about sacrifice and what we should be sacrificing. And that's another religious subject as well. But speaking of financial sacrifices, that's sometimes one of the big things that can be something to think about. Is it something that's ethical to expect financial sacrifice from someone? But that's another subject again. There's so many different things we could talk about here. One of my many concerns with Scientology, of course, is that there's instead of something along the lines of a collection plate for the poor, or even tithing in the LDS Church, that sort of thing, aside from any of those kinds of ideas, and there's many other things that you can do financially in your churches and things. I don't know, alms, one of the pillars of Islam, even is having to do a charity to the poor. There's a lot of things like that. But with Scientology, it's one of those things where you put in all this money to buying all these books, and nobody ever says anything about what's in the books unless you buy the book. Or at least, yeah. And so then there's all these books, tons and tons of books, and then there's all these seminars that cost money and all these things that you have to go to. And I don't understand I understand less than 1% of all the things you have to spend money on. It costs money to go up to a next OC level, whatever that means. What I'm talking about is that it sounds like the sort of religion that can expect tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars. For what? For what? What is someone getting out of this? If you're very, very wealthy, like certain actors, right? Maybe it's not such a big sacrifice. But if you're like most people, where you're trying to have a budget, it's not reasonable. Scientology they work with you, right? Well, sure. Well, it's a business, but what they're doing is very wrong. Where most churches, what happens is you go to church, and in a lot of churches, you don't even have to give anything. It's like optional. Of course, in my church, in the LDS church, if you become a member, it's only 10% that's expected. All that money goes to the poor, right? Humanitarian efforts. Goes to buildings, just like any other church, need buildings and all utilities behind it. And then just a few other things like church universities. There's just a few of them, and temples and that sort of thing. But the expectation is pretty, 10% is all that one can expect. Sometimes you can give more than that. Anyway, but a lot of churches don't even expect that. It's just whatever you can give, and nobody's gonna kick you out. I don't know. With Scientology, it's different. Again, it seems like the sort of thing that can suck you in and can take all your money. You lose all your friends. You lose your family even. Because if your family doesn't want to be Scientologists, they say you have to disconnect from them. I mention this stuff. I don't mean to sound anti-Scientologist, but frankly, their religious beliefs leave me no choice but to say these kinds of things. And myself being Mormon, I don't want to say anything bad about any other faith. But this is very concerning to me, these kinds of things. I certainly can understand anti-Mormonism much more easily than this faith, this church, if you will, this philosophy, this whatever Scientology is, that believes in Dianetics and something involving something from a gentleman that has many admirable, well, I wouldn't say admirable, but has very many remarkable qualities. He's a very, very intelligent man, but he was a science fiction author. Very, very intelligent, but he seems more deceptive than a man of integrity. So, yeah, I mean, that's the founder of Scientology is L. Ron Hubbard, and the religion is based off of his works of fiction. And, you have to understand, Hollywood actors are really, you have to kind of, I would say it should be more of a sympathy kind of thing. But many people that believe this kind of stuff, even if it's only some of it, they're in a state of mind, state of being where if for whatever reason Scientology were to be totally debunked, which is actually kind of easy to do, but like a lot of things that are religious, it comes down to belief, so that's a little bit different kind of situation. No, I mean, but these people would they're already kind of not the most stable people in the world emotionally, so it might really throw them for a loop. So this is why I don't like really talking about this stuff, because in general, whenever you speak negatively about religion, or you say what you don't agree with about religion, it always can put people off, and it can really hurt someone. So I don't like doing that. But for this one thing, Scientology, it's not that it's unbelievably weird. And it does make sense to me why Hollywood is into this kind of stuff, because Hollywood really doesn't like, well, let's face it, unless we're talking about Mel Gibson or Ricky Schroeder or something. There's some folks out there, Jim Caviezel, that really are indeed people that have their head on straight, I think, that understand, some things that are really real, at least. We'll say spiritual truths. But a lot of Hollywood doesn't even... They don't want to think about this stuff. They don't want to think about what is real spiritually. They want to think about other things, yeah. So, I don't know. That was just one of the things I wanted to talk about. The reason why I guess sometimes these thoughts cross my mind is it just has to do with the people that get sucked into this kind of stuff. It's easy enough to believe a scam sometimes. We can fall for scams if we're not careful. And Scientology is absolutely 100%, without a doubt, a scam. And I've heard so many things. I might go for a little walk here, but I've heard so many things, folks, about this thing, Scientology, that goes far and beyond anything that I've ever heard about most anything else. It's negative. I mean, sure, people have heard of Church of Satan stuff, but that's just almost if you want to make something more degenerate and evil seem more socially acceptable or something. But this stuff is just, Scientology is unbelievable. It's a form of psychology that isn't psychology, but it has psychological connections, as far as I can tell. And I think a lot of people sometimes would like to meet people socially, even dating-wise, but if a Scientologist decides to become a member of a different church, the weird thing is that I guess they have this thing where you could be a member of any religion and also Scientologists at the same time. Or, I don't know, I'm not sure if that's true. I just know that they have a lot of crazy, insane things about their religion that do affect your family and do affect all your friends and everybody that you know. Like things like stalking. I do actually truly mean that word, stalking. Not how a lot of people might casually use the term these days. I do actually mean the true nature of the word stalking. Stalking and constant phone calls, harassment, and all this stuff. This is just the tip of the iceberg of what I've heard about Scientology. It's really weird, folks. I don't know how to put it. I know just to go out on a limb here. I know about the weirdest, craziest stuff, not just about my church or Jehovah's Witnesses or Seventh-day Adventists, and I know about the crazy stuff about the Catholics. I know about the crazy stuff about a lot of churches out there. The Southern Baptist fire and brimstone stuff, and of course the Pentecostals don't even need to talk about that stuff, and most of the churches don't do the crazy stuff. But most churches have their crazy side. That's just the way this world is. It's a crazy, wicked world. And honestly, the crazy stuff, a lot of times it is just not true for some churches. And whatever stuff that does seem crazier, that has at least a little bit of truth or half-truths to it, it's the situations for some folks, some churches, it's just a bit more complex, a bit more involved than we sometimes truly understand, and we want to hold to these certain understandings of certain churches, and sometimes we have a hard time letting go of certain ideas about certain churches, but we just need to kind of keep chipping away at the things about our own preconceived notions about things that just aren't true, and that might take a while. It's like the idea of dairy being as healthy as vegetables. It's true, dairy is not as healthy as vegetables, but we can still consume dairy. Then we should definitely consume a lot less of it than we do vegetables. We should. But there's some people are going to hold to that way of eating dairy and vegetables, the ratios of those food groups, no matter what science is saying. It's the same thing with religion. And I have to respect that, but again, there are crazy things that are true about different religions, and then there are crazy things that are either half-truths or just not true. And not just Western religions. We can talk about stuff from India or Asia, East Asia, or all the other stuff, tribal beliefs from Africa or the Americas, that sort of thing, American Indian beliefs. Some things might seem nutty and crazy. Some things might seem like they make more sense. And of course, when it comes to a lot of the tribal beliefs, there's just a little bit less of that churchy thing going on. We don't really use the word doctrine. It's more like something spiritual or something, But anyway, so that's enough of that. So I just would caution you guys to not ever treat Scientology seriously, because this church, this quote-unquote church, is not a church. It's something very different. And yes, I have a lot of compassion for both John Travolta and Tom Cruise, anyone else who believe this religion, Isaac Hayes. I know maybe why they did believe it, but it is just kind of a lot of poppycock for the most part. Whatever things are true in it are also true when you think about the way we need to talk to folks sometimes if they trust us enough. I don't know, some kind of interpersonal thing. They might be touching on some good, interesting things, but anyway, in their auditing, so to speak. So aside from this subject, I'm also thinking a bit about some of the things that my grandpa believed and I believe about just the way I see the whole world from the creation of the world, the very beginning of the world, all the way to now. I made some stuff a while back about some videos, one or two at least, about different nations of the world and their origins and how things have just kind of gone on. So I myself am a creationist, Mormon creationist, and I have a pretty, not too elaborate, but moderately elaborate view of how the world's history has been, I guess you could say. And of course I believe in Adam and Eve. And yes, I believe Adam and Eve were a certain ethnicity. I won't get into that right now, but they were flesh and blood. They did actually have a race. A lot of people think Adam and Eve were a certain race that they probably weren't. But when it comes to race, it's a very sensitive subject, so I won't get into that right now. You guys can ask me questions if you want to about that. But it doesn't really matter what someone's race is. It's just the question I think we want to ask is why did God create the races in the first place? And because of the divisive factor of race, really, or anything else that might be negative to anyone. Aside from that, after Noah and the flood, and there was a flood, and there were survivors of the flood. We don't know how the animals got on the ark, but after all that happened, you had Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and the descendants of Shem are, as you could probably guess, the Semites. Sem, S-E-M, Semite, is from Shem. Now you also have a lot of others of his descendants where you have some makes sense. The word Hebrew is directly related to the name Heber, or the word for Hebron. All of these kinds of things. So, you see the similarities with names and place names geographically. You should very easily. Ham, right? The son of Noah, who married Egyptus, who was a descendant of Cain. And Egyptus meant, in some language, that which is forbidden. In the ancient world, according to my knowledge, for some reason, the descendants of Cain were not allowed to marry descendants of Seth, basically, because Enos was killed by Cain. And there's a lot of speculation, the automatic speculation being that descendants of Cain were black. Most likely they probably were. We just don't know all the details as to why and what and who and where. All we know is that Egyptus was probably black and married Ham, and the descendants were varied races that were darker skinned. And, think about it this way. If Ham was white and Egyptus was black, their offspring would be various races, right? Well, yeah, as far as I know, and as far as those guys go, we know that Cush, Cush, Cush's descendants were definitely black. Some of them West African, some of them East African. We tend to think of them as being more East African, but one of Cush's descendants, Nimrod, was one of the ancestors of the Yoruba tribe in West Africa. So we know that some of his descendants from Cush went over to West Africa as well, and the Bantu and that sort of thing. But also, there's some speculation that Phut, one of the other sons of Ham, formed some of the ancestry makeup of the West Africans as well. And Phut went into Libya, basically northwestern Africa, but it said that he also went down the coast of the Atlantic Ocean, basically, over time. So anyway, this is kind of a little bit of a summarized version of the history of the world. Some of these thoughts that these are all my own thoughts. I've tried to think about this a lot. A lot of this doesn't have anything to do with my religious beliefs, or at least it's my own thoughts. But I've tried to piece together what I can from history and the Bible and try to make a sense of everything. Now, of course, Canaan, his descendants went all over the map, but more especially in the Mediterranean, but also definitely over in Asia. And he was more olive-toned as far as his complexion. But you guys also have to remember that descendants of Phut and Cush also went eastward as well, over to more of the southern parts of Asia. So, everyone thinks, we have different races because they evolved based on the climate. Yeah, that might be true in a way. You also had originally a dark-skinned race that had varying shades, and you can see how this happened. And they tended to go where they tended to go. There was, a idea in the Bible, I'm not sure how concrete this is, that Ham was given a certain allotment of land in Africa. And Canaan was despised by his brothers because he went eastward from that area. He didn't want to go into Africa. I'm sure some of his descendants did, but that's somewhere, I always quote scriptures immediately, but so Japheth's ancestry is very involved, and I went over Ham a little bit. Basically, with descendants of Shem, a lot of them stayed in the Middle East, but a lot of them went over to into Asia as well, farther east into Asia. But you had, Elam, which went into Persia, formed the Persian thing, and of course Media was from Madai, which is this descendant of Japheth, so he was more Indo-European. Those two guys mixed a little bit and formed the Iranians, Persians were. But Elam went even further to the east. Some of them went down to India. They also have Arpachshad and kind of formed the Fertile Crescent folks, all Israel as well, and Arabs as well. In when we talk about Isaac or Ishmael, then you have Lud, became Lydians in Turkey, Western Turkey, and you had and even other folks as well, groups, and you had Aram, which became the Arameans, over in Lebanon and Syria, that sort of thing. Well, of course, Asher, also Syria, and they're in that general ballpark. But then there's also some speculation that, well, not just speculation, but it's said that a lot of the descendants of a lot of the ancestry of the Germans and thereabouts were also from ancient Assyrians as well. Various, you can get into that as well. But you have like 7 sons of Japheth, and that's so involved. Maybe I should save that for another video. But what I wanted to talk about here then was, It just has to do with, well, maybe I'll save to the after this ancient world thing. I'll say that from their video. But there's a lot of questions I sometimes have about my own identity, the identity of other people, how I fit into this world, my own ancestry, how that plays into my own identity, if that does. A lot of people will just say that it doesn't matter at all. It's just a subject that a lot of people don't really understand, I think. They don't really know what they're saying. It doesn't have to be a value judgment. It doesn't have to be something positive or negative. It just has to do with, well, who do I have more in common with, and who do I have less in common with, and how is the humanity of other people something to increase my own knowledge of humanity in general about? I mean, like, if I am more related or less related to this group or that group, why, and how can we build off of commonalities, right? And how do our differences become something that's not a negative thing, and something that just can help us really enjoy each other's company a lot more. For instance, if I'm talking about American Indians here, basically there's a religious belief that we have as Mormons that the majority at least, I would say the clear majority of American Indians have essentially Israelite ancestry. Ancient, it all goes back to a man named Lehi, who left Jerusalem about 600 BC. But not just him, and he was a prophet. Not just Lehi, there was a man named Mulek as well. There may have been others, but you have, I'm sure, of course you have an Asian connection via Siberia to Canada. You may have had some African tribes that came over from Africa to the Amazon. And who knows whoever else came over from wherever. We know at least the Vikings were a lot later in coming over to Newfoundland. But there's also things that, sometimes people see these connections between Polynesians and American Indians. Well, one of the reasons why that is because there's a guy, his name is Haygoth, who sailed from the Americas to Polynesia, thereabouts, New Zealand, and Haygoth was just directly connected to he's just from the same sort of people as there were in the Americas, and just that in Polynesia you have not only American Indian, people that were anciently related to American Indians, but you have other folks from Asia, as well as the folks that were related to Kush, but not necessarily Africans. Similar physical characteristics, but there were definitely some differences as well. Very physically diverse sorts of folks that came from Kush. Hopefully this all makes sense. I tend to agree with most folks researching this area in depth that are kind of combining the Bible with history, but some things are my own beliefs, but I'm just trying to make sense of everything. Now, a lot of this is still not necessarily 100%. I mean, I'm always open to correcting a few things here and there when something sounds convincing enough. But this is the way the history is. History is a little bit different than, say, the Ten Commandments, which a lot of people want to treat in a similar way as history, but you just don't mess around with the doctrine of God. It's just not something you do unless you just don't agree with it. But it's also on that related note, it's very tempting to see religion and Christianity, traditional Christianity, that sort of thing, as being something very oppressive and controlling. And this is the way things are done, like a state government or a state religion. And everybody must belong to this church, or else you're going to hell, or going to be, penniless and socially ostracized and all that stuff. There's so many things about traditional religion that put off a lot of people that I've always disliked intensely. And it's very easy, because again, I'm a little more conservative and Mormon, for me to be sometimes considered in the same train of thought as a lot of those kinds of forces in the past. I'm not like those guys at all. Real truth and real religion is always meant to help someone have more freedom and happiness in their lives. It's not, there's no control. The only things that happen, for instance, in my church, when somebody just doesn't believe in the church, is we're kind of really sad, bummed out, a lot of people, but we try to still talk to people. It's not easy. We still try to be someone's friend or family member, that sort of thing. It's certainly not easy sometimes, but there's no public humiliation. There's no ostracization. It might seem a little bit like that from that kind of puritanical English, I wouldn't say just English, but the puritanical kind of mindset, this seriousness of sin and sort of thing, of certain sins. It is different to my church. But again, a lot of members of a church, a lot of Mormons we're still kind of figuring out a little better how to be Mormon. It's a hard religion to live fully, and but by same another train of thought here is that a lot of people rag on these Puritans and other folks that seem very clannish and closed and very strict, even folks like the Amish in ways. And the thing is when you live high standards, it always pays off. It's always the right way of being, no matter what anyone else says. But the thing is that a lot of folks from these backgrounds just don't associate it as much always with other sorts of folks. You probably will understand why that is. It's because there's a fear of the sinfulness of other groups getting into behavior, mindset, sort of thing. People are trying to live these more strict religions. And on and on and on. I mean, certainly a lot of, we'll say, less religious folks, or less traditional, we'll say less religiously inclined, so especially in this train of thought. A lot of these folks should realize where these folks are coming from, whatever the group is. Whether it's a Bible church out in the middle of the Rocky Mountains where, it's just a Bible church, right? It's kind of pretty much mostly white with some Mexican American Indian. Anything from that kind of church all the way over to Pennsylvania, where you just have Amish folks that don't have any technology, or they don't use technology, but they're nice folks and they're just not especially out in the limelight. They try to not draw attention to themselves, right? And then, of course, you have Mormons that tend to, be huge into having, a lot of family values and associate with many of you guys a bit more. But, we try to live these high moral standards. Believe me, there's a lot of misunderstanding on both ends. But it doesn't mean that we shouldn't have this kind of communication or friendships and that sort of thing. It also doesn't mean that Mormons have to accept the values of these other people. These other people have to accept the values of Mormons. It's everybody's choice. It's just, and who's the author of all this confusion and all these many differences that are more troubling? Well, the author of this confusion is Satan. Of course, we still have our choice in this life, what we want to believe in, what we want to do, and that's certainly from God. So these two facts, these two truths. Satan is the author of confusion in this world, and God wants us to have choice. These things are huge, and that also, in addition to this, the purpose of life being to choose between good and evil, and to prepare to meet God after this life. And of course, also to learn, become more educated, and go through all these experiences in life. The idea is we want to become like God someday. Why wouldn't we be? Why would, what's limiting our happiness? What's limiting our lives even right now? That's always the questions to ask. We don't always know the answers to those questions, but I think it's very sensible to ask ourselves the question, getting back to my first idea with Scientology, is what I'm believing in. There's what, and oh geez, Scientology just has nothing to, oh man, it's absolutely the craziest thing I've ever heard. But is what I'm all about. Even if it's not a religious thing, but it's what I'm doing. Is that helping me become all I can be? And I just, it's the question to always ask, every day. And there's a lot of things to drag someone down. There's a lot of things to make someone very depressed, discouraged. So I know someone that told me, just don't watch the news. Don't see anything negative. There's something to that. I had a high school humanities teacher that said, you need to read the news. You need to watch the news. And so who do I believe? Well, it's kind of where they're coming from. Obviously, the person that said don't read the news doesn't want me to read about wars, doesn't want me to read about political fighting and nonsense like that. Well, it's not nonsense. All that's contentious stuff, right? Because it just makes you all upset. And what can you do about it? You can vote. You could try to make sense of what's going on, but it's just not going to do much for you at all. And then, the teacher that told me to read the paper just wants me to be informed about these things, so that when I do vote, I'll know a few things, about what to do. And then it's good to know about what's happening in the world, so that you just need to know about these things. But I would rather that we had a lot of good things happening in the world rather than wars, war after war after war after war. And so I do believe in a lot of things that people don't otherwise believe in. It doesn't make any sense to me why you'd have war after war after war, unless you had somebody that was benefiting from that kind of thing. Just think about it. Who benefits from war? Right? It's definitely not the people that are dying. Right? Someone could say, we take some land from Israel, or Israel saying we can take some land from, and you can say, there's those kind of old hatreds and things and religious differences. Sure, okay, but who's no matter who wins, who always profits from those kinds of things, those battles, those wars? Well, it's the people that make the weapons. Now, I'm not going to get into a lot of conspiracies from this video. I just want you guys to think about this really a little bit. Just consider, again, we're talking about people that can take advantage of people. All the people that are waiting, talk about wolves in sheep's clothing. People that are just waiting to take advantage of the unsuspecting out there. And there are those people. And there are those organizations. And it's very real. And I guess you'll know it's real if you ever get scammed, or if you ever have personally experienced something along these lines. So I love this country. I would die for this country. But not for the government, just for the people. Someone says, that doesn't make any sense. The government is the people. Well, okay, if that was the case these days, when was the last time that you personally approved anything that you see the government doing? It doesn't make any sense to me at all. The government has not been the people for quite some time. And our representatives are bribed all the time, many times, or there's all kinds of, you call it, compromise, and there's all kinds of stuff going on in Washington, D.C. none of us would approve of, but it goes on. And I think we know why it goes on, more or less. Just at present, we're not powerless to do anything about it, but there are militias, and that's why they exist. It's just a matter of coordinating all the militias when we've had enough, and that will happen at some point. Washington D.C. can say we have all these preparations in order, prepare for the worst, but we have hundreds of millions of citizens. I don't know how many people would support the government if everybody were to say we've had enough. But like I say, I love this country. I'll catch you guys later. Thanks. Bye.